Hey folks, welcome in. We're going to give folks a chance to get situated and then we'll kick off in a minute or two. In the meantime, feel free to just introduce yourself in the chat. We'd love to hear where you're calling in from. Hey folks, welcome to Literacy Unlocked, Families as Literacy Champions. We're going to get started in just 1 minute. In the meantime, feel free to chat. We'd love to hear where you're calling in from. Welcome, welcome. Feel free to keep introducing yourself, and I'm going to kick us off. We have a full hour, and I know more folks will join in. But just first wanted to welcome everyone to the Literacy Unlocked webinar series, part 1. Really excited to come together in this space with you all to talk about empowering families and caregivers in students' literacy development and amplifying bright spots and efforts around the country that help engage, inform, and mobilize parents in these efforts. Emily, do you mind just going ahead and sharing the screen as well, please? So before we dive in and do that, we have a really fabulous panel set up. I'm just going to take a moment to share a little bit of context around this webinar series and the Alliance for Resource Equity. The Alliance for Resource Equity is the host of today's webinar, and it's a partnership between EdTrust and Education Resource Strategies. And our goal broadly is to make sure that district leaders and advocates are advancing resource equity in their community. And so if you go to the next slide, this kind of breaks down that resource equity in our mind is thinking about not only how much money a district or a school has, but also how well those resources are being used to meet all students' needs, aspirations, and ability, dreams for the future. And so that requires us to think about resources more broadly than just money, which is absolutely an important part of the discussion, but certainly not everything. So to help us do that, the Alliance for Resource Equity consists of a framework which outlines 10 dimensions of resource equity to help give us shared language about the resources that impact student experiences day in and day out at school. And so you'll see the 10 dimensions listed up on the screen. And while the first one is school funding, as I mentioned, we also need to be thinking about how resources are distributed to support things like high quality, diverse teaching, things like empowering rigorous content, facilities that are safe and well maintained, and things that really allow students to learn and thrive. And we'll hear themes of all of those dimensions of resource equity in today's conversation, I'm sure. The Alliance for Resource Equity also includes a thorough toolkit that helps advocates and district leaders understand the state of resource equity in their community, pinpoint various advocacy actions, think about who has authority in their community to be making a change, and some case-making guidance around how to message their advocacy priority. That's all free on our website. We're not going to have a chance to kind of dig into that today by any means, but would love to connect with you at a different time to think about how to leverage those assets in your own community. And then lastly, the Alliance for Resource Equity hosts webinars such as this Literacy Unlocked series to bring to life resource equity by digging a bit deeper, uplifting stories of advocates and unpacking complex issues in our community, and ideally sharing practical tools and recommendations as well. So we hope that in this next hour, it gives us a chance to talk about empowering families and caregivers in students' literacy development. And I'll say we named this series Literacy Unlocked because being able to skillfully read and write, as we all know, really just like unlocks the world around us, quite simply. It grants us access individually to accessing economic opportunity, and then as a society helps us in the pursuit of democracy, freedom, and equality. And so as the country is coalescing around like how to improve literacy in our country and in our communities, making sense of what it means to be more aligned with the evidence base and things like that, families are absolutely a fundamental part of those conversations. They're children's first teachers, and then as they progress in their educational journeys, continue to be their teachers and also really their champions. So by the end of this next hour, we're hoping that you'll walk away with some resources and clear next steps for advocacy in your own community. And I'll just end with saying, in the midst of like a really volatile time, significant budget cuts, a government shutdown, I don't need to list everything that we're up against. Breaking down these big issues into smaller chunks and hearing about bright spots and really powerful advocacy opportunities is really going to sustain us, I hope, in this time. So our agenda today is that my fantastic colleague Carl Felton will moderate a panel, and I'll let him and our panelists introduce themselves in just a moment. One last logistical thing from me is we have a Q&A function, and we also have time for Q&A at the end. So please feel free to use that function as well as just the chat function to be engaging with the content as well as other attendees in this time together. So with that, Carl, I'll turn it over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Again, for those of you who don't know, my name is Carl Felton III. I'm a policy analyst here at EdTrust. I mainly focus on issues related to school climate, such as chronic absenteeism, school safety, and everything in between. It's a pleasure to be here with you all this afternoon. I would love if we could take a moment and have all the panelists go around and introduce yourself and share what brings you to the work. And what is one focus area for you and your organization on this conversation as we talk about advancing literacy through family? Each of you take about 2 minutes. We'll start with Trinace.
Thank you, Carl. I appreciate it. So yes, my name is Trinace Dorsey Hollins. I'm a founder and director of Parent Shield Fort Worth. We are a parent-led movement, of course, in Fort Worth, Texas, where our mission is really just so that we can get parents engaged and informed, educated about what's going on in the education landscape and how they can best use their voices to change the policies that most affect our children. I am a fifth generation Fort Worthian, very passionate about education, mom of two. And so just really eager to get this information into the hands of parents, because I feel like when parents are informed and engaged, they're unstoppable. And so that's our main mission. Excited to be here today to discuss further.
Let's go to Olga.
Hi, everyone. My name is Olga Corona de la Cruz. I am the Senior Campaign Director with Families in Schools here in Los Angeles, California. So all of our work is really focused on early literacy and family engagement. I am a first generation master's degree. And in my family, I was also an English language learner, right? So there was a lot of spaces in which I saw opportunities that my parents were given through whether it was a teacher or another CBO or involving them in my education. And that really led to set myself up for success. We were fortunate to have all three of our siblings be college graduates, right? And I know that family engagement works. And I want to make sure that in the work that I do, I continue to amplify that because, again, to Trinace's point, if families are involved, we can get anything and everything done. So I look forward to this conversation.
We love that. And Julia?
Hi, everybody. It's great to be with you today. My name is Julia Cadwallander. I am the Managing Director of Read by Fourth, which is Philadelphia's early literacy movement. We are a citywide coalition, including families, educators, and systems leaders that are all working towards the goal that every child in Philadelphia becomes a strong, confident reader by the start of 4th grade. My background personally is in education, elementary special education, and literacy instruction, and I'm a mom to 3 boys. So I know personally that it is neither just on teachers nor on parents, but it takes a whole city and a whole ecosystem to raise a reader. So at Read by Fourth here in Philly, we believe that everyone has a role to play in raising strong readers. So we bring people together for working groups that include folks like parents and teachers, librarians, rec leaders, city officials. Each person holds a piece of the puzzle, and we convene working groups that mobilize together to promote early literacy. And at the heart of it all, we know family love is the most important thing. As other folks have said, parents are the child's first and most important teachers. And we know that love alone is not enough. And so our efforts together to bring together these working groups mobilize folks around what works to raise readers across the city.
Thank you, Julia, for that introduction. This next question is for all of our panelists. We can go in the same order in which you just went. My question to you is, what does it mean to empower parents as we engage in this conversation on family literacy? So specifically, what does it mean to empower parents by what they know and do? And then what do schools and systems lose when parents are sidelined from the conversation?
Gotcha. I think I was first, so I will kick us off. I think the first and most important thing is not only is it that schools are losing, it's our students that are losing. So I think that's the first and most important thing to highlight. But I think by engaging parents really in the conversation means, how do we let parents know the truth? Transparent information. I think it's very obvious to most that parents are the closest to the problem, but often the furthest away from actually digging into and having a say so in what that actually looks like. So for me, I would say just really engaging parents with transparent information, being honest. The data is out there. So how do we provide it to parents so that they understand it? Because as I stated before, when parents are aware, they're unstoppable. But we have to have that information to be able to make the proper decisions for our children.
That's great. Thank you. Olga?
Yeah, so when I think about an empowered parent, they really understand how reading develops, right? They know what their child should be learning, and they feel confident about asking questions to their child's teacher or to their child's school coordinator, right? How is my child doing? What can I do at home to support? And they're really not seeing themselves as outsiders of their child's education. But in order for that to happen, as community partners, as educators, as school leaders, it's also so critical that we recognize the expertise and learning that they already have in their child's education, right? We know that reading and early literacy begins at birth, right? And so there's already an understanding that parents come with this knowledge. So how do we now give them the opportunity to really practice it, right? For us, as many of us in this call might be academics, right? Parents already know about phonics. Parents already know about phonemic awareness. They're singing to their children. They're playing games on road trips, right? So how do we let them know, like, you're already doing all of this at home? This is just another way that we're speaking about it at school. And when this doesn't happen, when families are sidelined, schools lose insight, they lose family trust, and cultural relevance. And so these are really the ingredients that make family engagement and early literacy supports sustainable.
I love that. So we have transparency begets action. And then we have this curiosity and proximity to the conversation, right? Able to give voice, are able to then build trust. How about you, Julia? What do you have for us?
Yeah, I mean, building on a lot of what Trinace and Olga have said, you know, at Read by Fourth, we know that empowerment isn't about giving parents power, it's about reminding them of the power they already have. Like Olga said, parents are singing to their kids, they're giving them ways to practice phonemic awareness, but we are just reminding them of what that power is and helping to connect that power to the systems that they have to interact with in order for their children to be successful. So, for example, we know that families might know and ways to practice phonics, but they don't think of it as phonics, right? They don't need jargon, they just need clarity. So we lean into plain language, breaking down ideas, and one of the ways we've done that and put that into action is a parent workshop on early reading skills, which is designed by literacy specialists and community leaders together, a workshop that helps families of children in grades K through 3 to learn how to practice those things and just to learn the language that the teachers are talking about so that they can do what Olga said and ask the right questions to the child's school, and to help shape what is happening in the home, connecting it to the school. We know that empowered parents know that reading is everywhere and that they can turn those small moments into bigger impact. So some of the other things that we've done, like we created Philly ABCs, and we have these installed as posters around the city, as flashcards that families can use, and they're Philly specific words. So for example, if you know anything about Philadelphia, pride is a big part of it. So H is for heaping hoagie. That's the kind of sandwich some people in different parts of the country call it a different thing. In Philadelphia, it's a hoagie, right? W is for water ice. And so we have these installations of the Philly ABCs around to help make the spaces that families are already in, give them more opportunities to connect to the literacy skills that the teachers want them to be practicing. And I think I'll just close with saying something similar to what Olga said, that when families are sidelined, systems lose their most powerful partners. So if you don't have the parent voice there, you lose insight to what children actually need, and you lose the trust that makes reform possible. So when parents are informed, included, and inspired, they don't just fight for their own child to read, but they fight for every child to read. And that's really what we are all hoping for in this work.
That's great, Julia. I really appreciate that. To your point, I would love to go a little bit deeper with the conversation of having families be informed and inspired. My next question is to Olga, and we all know about the shifts that are happening in states and districts in terms of reading instruction, such as using the science of reading or other evidence-based instruction practices. But from your perspective, what are the most important things families need to understand the new reforms that are happening in education? How does a parent utilize these strategies in so many new things going on to support their students?
Great question, Carl. To give a little bit of context for some folks, at Families in Schools and through the Read Aloud campaign, we've been following a lot of the shifts happening across the country. And right now in California, most recently, a bill, AB 1454, was passed, where there is an ask for teachers to be provided PD with evidence-based instruction practices, along with aligned materials that are evidence-based identified. In addition to that, there is PD requirement for principals and also school coaches or literacy coaches to also get this type of support, right? Which is a great win. And simultaneously, for us, it's really important that we're talking to parents, caregivers about what is happening. And so one of the biggest things that is important when we're talking about reform is really being able to clarify what all of this terminology means, right? And so, for example, for too long, we know that many of our students, especially English language learners, students of color, students with reading difficulties, haven't received the kind of evidence-based instruction that really helps them become skilled and confident readers. And so this moment really represents a lot of hope for us, but also there's a lot of risk, right? Because when big system changes happen, families are often the last ones to know, or they hear about it in pieces and from different entities, right? Without any context themselves. So one of the most important things that we want families to understand is that science of reading is not one program, right? It's not one curriculum. It is a body of research that explains how children actually learn to read. And so that includes things like explicit teaching, as I was mentioning, of phonics, phonemic awareness, vocabulary, fluency, and comprehension. But really also understanding how language develops, especially for multilingual learners, because reading isn't just decoding sounds, it's really connecting what they know in one language and also being able to learn it in another, right? So as we think about implementing a lot of these reforms, we really have to remember that evidence-based instruction must also be culturally and linguistically responsive, right? Really be thinking about what can we do within the classroom to ensure that our communities are understanding this and are really being partners in the development of how we move forward with some of these legislations. And so for us at the Read LA campaign, we're really creating a process through our Literacy Ambassadors program where we are recruiting community members, advocates, parents, or caregivers who just want to know more. What is the science of reading? What is evidence-based instruction? And we've created a curriculum where we really share with them, look, this is how the brain learns to read, right? These are the pillars of early literacy. And with LAUSD, we've been fortunate to have a great partnership with them. We co-created a set of questions that parents should be asking their child's schools, their teachers, and their principals. And there's also some questions for English language learners as well included. And so what these ambassadors are now doing is they're taking this information using the promotora model, and folks are familiar with that, and they're taking that out to the communities, and they're able to share the information, whether it be at another community event, at a community festival. Some of them are going into other parent centers in our elementary schools here and providing community pláticas where they do the same thing. This is how the brain learns to read, the science behind that. These are the pillars that students need to be skilled at by the end of third grade. And then these are questions that you can take, right? And so once parents have these questions and have access to these tools, I'm not going to go to Mr. Carl and ask, how is, my daughter doing? I'm going to say, hey, Mr. Carl, you said that Olga, is struggling with reading, to read more at home. Okay, is it phonemic awareness? Is it vocabulary? Is it fluency, right? Now I am a parent who has the confidence to ask Mr. Carl, what exactly is Olga struggling with, right? And that is the key piece that parents need to have in order for us to really think about how do we engage them and how do we keep them informed in real time of all these policy changes, because it is a lot. And, for most of us here, if you read a bill, it's just infinite, right? How do we understand that and how do we dissect that in a way that is really comprehensive and accessible to our families? And that is what we need in order to make sure that families, caregivers are really included in the process when we talk about early literacy and their child's literacy journey.
Thank you, Olga. You shared so much. But what I most appreciate is the need to make everything palatable for our families. All right. Not just using EduSpeak, not just using legislative speak, but making sure that the messages are clear and that so that they can have the confidence they need to support their children and to give voice to the conversation.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Our next question is for Trinace. So in light of our recent policies, there's a new policy about notification through data transparency. This is a multifaceted question. But first, can you briefly share why is clear, accessible information important? And then let us know, more importantly, let us know notification is not the same as engagement, but authentic engagement reorients the conversation towards mutual respect, collaboration, and shared responsibility. Why is this a necessary shift? And what are the strategies advocates can use with district leaders to move from notifying parents to engaging families as partners? You're on mute. Nope. How about I go to Julia and we come back to you? Okay. Julia, what would you say are strategies that have proven to be effective for mobilizing families and communities to actively support literacy reforms and advocate for stronger instruction?
Yeah, I think first of all, it's so important that we question our assumptions. We often hear people say, how do we get parents interested in literacy? But the truth is, many already are. I've never met a parent who didn't want their child to thrive as a reader. And so the question isn't just about motivation, it's about access, opportunity, time, and trust. And in Philadelphia, we have a program that sounds pretty similar to the literacy ambassadors that Olga has working in Read LA. We call them reading captains. And reading captains are trusted messengers. They're neighborhood volunteers trained in how children learn to read. They're given access to books, resources, and practical tools to share literacy knowledge with parents and caregivers in their communities. And that's a way that we bring power to the families and to the communities, the power of existing relationships and deep knowledge of the families, how families in that community communicate, what they need, and how to reach them. We're just connecting the dots with a little bit more support right there in their neighborhoods. But one of the quotes that helped us to build that is from Stephen Covey, that he says, and we repeat this a lot, change happens at the speed of trust, right? So reading captains bring that to life. They have these authentic voices, neighborhood connections, everyday conversations about literacy, and they carry that message farther than a flyer can, right? And so that's actually how families get mobilized in order to support their children. The other thing that is key to our work is we have to share the power and pay people for it, right? Families aren't just for focus groups. Their lived experiences are invaluable to the work. And so we have tried to shift our mindset from family engagement to genuine partnership by creating opportunities to co-create with parents, to shape decision-making, and most importantly, I think, to compensate them for their time. So our parent council is one of the ways that we do that, where parents and caregivers are paid to participate in our working groups. They have meetings outside of that working group to support and connect with one another. And they're also paid for their time to prepare for those working groups. And so we're really compensating folks for their expertise and ideas, and making sure that when we say we've got a seat at the table for parents, that we're actually making that space welcoming and one in which they can really engage in. And that takes effort. And it's something that we see across our network is sometimes a challenge, right? And so it requires some mindset shifts and some structure shifts that we're still working on. But in case it's helpful to other folks, I will just share a few strategies that we use to do that. Some of it's really simple, right? Rotating who speaks first so that parents lead, not just respond. That looks like in some sessions starting with listening instead of presentations, right? Rather than saying, here's the agenda for the meeting today, and I'm going to give you a lot of information and ask you to react. We actually start with listening, and then the meeting is reactive to that. And a really key thing that I mentioned before is using clear language, defining terms and acronyms so that everyone can contribute. Just making sure that we have folks at the table who are academics, folks at the table who maybe have a background in something not related to literacy, but they care about literacy, they care about their child's literacy, and we need to make sure that everybody has the same vocabulary in order to contribute to the conversation. And I will share one of my favorite resources for creating meeting formats that are more creative and more inclusive. Comes from Liberating Structures. There's an online menu that provides really great tools and ideas for ways to structure a meeting that has helped us to, again, reward the parents and really honor the value that they bring to the meetings in a more meaningful and comprehensive way.
Thank you, Julia. I think that was very helpful information. I love how you broke everything down to the most practical level of how folks can engage parents in a myriad of ways, but also value them, not just for focus groups, but as you said, value them in compensation. I think that is a huge opportunity for families. I also appreciated that you shared, listen, like traditionally, there are some mindsets that assume parents don't want to engage or can't engage, when we have to ask ourselves as systems folks, are we set up? Do we have the necessary structure in place for folks to engage where they are, not to achieve some level or fit some perfect mold to have voice and to contribute to the conversation? That was super helpful. Trinace, I would love to circle back to you. I'm really glad you're here with us. Could you share with us what shifts are necessary to get us from notifying to engaging perspectives?
Absolutely. And thank you guys so much for being patient with me and technology. We know how that could be. So I appreciate that, first of all. But I just think it's super important, like you said, that we do make that shift from just notifying parents to engage it, because there is a huge difference between the two. And when I first got into this work and was wondering, like, why are parents not rioting the schools? Because the literacy rates are so low. But like Julia said, it's not because parents don't want to be engaged. They really didn't know that there was a problem, because looking at it from a report card standpoint, kids are bringing home A's and B's on their report card. That's not a problem. So parents are taking their kids to have ice cream and cookies because they feel like they're doing a great job, not realizing that those A's and B's do not equate to those same children being able to know how to read. I think a report card is a great example of a notification. And the difference between that is it's a one-way communication. It's to inform parents, and it's not at all inviting for a parent to engage and or participate. But when we're speaking on engaging, that's when there's a two-way communication. Parents are involved. They're invited to participate and collaborate and use their voices to actually shape what that looks like. And there's a big difference. And then just in Fort Worth, we've been doing a lot of the work kind of similar to what Olga is doing as well. We've been providing training. We call them fellowships that we put parents through. We're currently in a fellowship right now, and our parents are learning what is going on in the landscape of education in our city, because it's not something that the schools are sharing with parents. And what does that look like for our kids? How do we find out what is really going on within the schools? What is the data saying about our schools and about our kids specifically? How can we drill down into what the state exams are saying for my child directly? And where do I get that information? We're walking parents through that information to show them and share with them, and not as a, I got you, your child is failing, more of a, you know the truth now, and here are some supports and some tools that you can take into the school, like Olga said, also some questions that you now can share with your child's teacher, principal, to get clarity on, is my child on grade level? And if there needs to possibly be an evaluation take place. Just so many tools that parents didn't know and didn't have. And then we're also dealing with a population of parents who the school system may have not worked in their best benefit. So they're struggling themselves. So it's like, how do we still go back and cater to those parents, but still also promoting literacy for those children in those communities?
Wow, that's helpful. That's so helpful. But what I hear most is taking the time to bridge gaps for our families. Absolutely. Regardless of where they are, regardless of their past experiences, but meeting them in the moment to help them to support their students. Before we
And also helping parents use, I'm sorry, one last thing, Carl, just helping parents use their story of self along with what's going on with their child to help shape the policies that we want to see true for our children and our communities. So because you may not know what the science of reading is, let us educate you on those key factors, the fluency, the comprehension, all of those pieces, the phonemic awareness, what those mean and how you can practically use them in your child's day-to-day lives. And like you said, that makes a world of difference when you're going and you're talking to your child's teacher instead of just saying, how's my child doing? No, I know that now the teachers in the schools know that they're talking to a parent. Oh, this parent knows the components. They know what they're talking about. I have to kind of have a different level of conversation with them. That is what we want for our city, for our state, for our United States, period. We want parents to be engaged and informed and know that they are the first line of defense for their kids. And we can shape the policies out here that are going to advance our kids and close those gaps.
I love that. I love that. I couldn't have said it more eloquently than you did. Let's shift gears here for a second and let's talk about community-wide approaches to literacy. This is a question for all panelists, and why don't each of you take about 60 to 90 seconds to answer this question. What would you say are the advantages to taking a community-wide approach to literacy reform and engaging not just education partners, but also public health folks, social service providers, and including parents in that conversation? And what would you say are the biggest challenges, but also the biggest benefits to that?
I can start.
Sure.
Yeah. So that's a great question. When we take a community-wide approach to early literacy, we really send a powerful message, right? That every part of a child's world matters. And so when we think about health clinics in LA, a lot of people or families, right? The metro public systems, right? When we're doing some wellness visits, whenever these interactions are happening and a child and their family are seeing, family reading tips, or they're getting a book every time they go to their doctor's visit, or they're receiving something that is related to their early literacy development, we're able to really continue to strengthen this movement as a community movement, right? And it's not just like our teachers are trying to do this, or schools or districts. Like literally, this is all of us as a society trying to ensure that all of our kids have the right to read. And so that's one piece, right? We're really building a movement. On another end, being the challenge that, continues, because I know there are efforts, I don't want to discount that either, but a challenge that still continues, just kind of bridging some of those gaps and kind of building those partnerships with community members or organizations or, even corporations outside of the education system. And so really thinking about how can this be an opportunity for us to bridge those gaps between other sectors? Because at the end of the day, if our children can't read, one, they're more likely to drop out of high school. Two, if this happens, who is going to be our workforce in the future, right? So it's not just one end or the other end who's losing, we're all losing our brightest minds. And so we want to make sure that this is a movement that is really a partnership and community effort, because it takes a village to get all of our kids there.
I think Olga said that so well. And you have to have a community-wide approach in order to help these systems speak to one another, right? So doctors have one set of language and data that they use when they're engaging with families. When we have partners who are doctors who are trained through something like Reach Out and Read to provide literacy tips at the doctor's appointment, that's one way that it's doing what Olga says, where families are surrounded by literacy everywhere they are. And that's sort of an example of finding a way to help the system speak to one another. But the other thing is that doctors then have data on families that educators don't have, right? Doctors ask questions of families of young children. There's certain surveys that they ask, like, how often do you read to your child? What does, your household who's in your household, what is the makeup of that. That data isn't shared with teachers. That data isn't shared with the education system. We can't expect the systems alone to speak to one another. And that's why we have to engage community partners to sort of fill in the gaps and be that bridge between the systems to help the whole community, the ecosystem that supports children, to be robust enough to do that, right?
Thank you. And I'm going to pose the same question to Trinace, but I want to focus a little bit more on our skeptics who may be a little concerned about this community-wide approach. Maybe some folks are worried about there being too many cooks in the kitchen, or too many folks that don't know enough about education involving themselves in this conversation. What would you say are the potential challenges, or maybe even lean into why no one should really worry about any of the negative aspects or having a cynicistic perspective here?
Most definitely a great question, and an actual question that comes up a lot. So I think there's always going to be the naysayers. And is this important? Is this just the new next big thing to worry about? And if we continue to do the same thing, we're going to continue to get the same results. And we know that means that our kids are going to continue to be unable to read. And our kids today are our futures tomorrow. So just really quick, wanted to share an example of how I can see that it works so positive too, because I feel like there were a bunch of those naysayers in Fort Worth, Tarrant County for a while. But the community didn't stop. We continued to pressure, parents continued to get engaged and pressure the district, continued to pressure our city leaders, which in Fort Worth, our mayor really does not have any control over education. That's not her umbrella. But we continue to meet with our mayor and let them know it still affects all of your constituents. And so we were able to get our mayor, our city, we got over 80 people to sign on to a PAC, just basically recognizing that literacy needs to be a priority for our city. That equated to our district recognizing that literacy needed to be the #1 priority of our district. And no, we're not where we need to be, but because we have so many, the doctor sectors, the lawyers, our city council members, our mayors, our trustees, parents, all of these people pushing the same message that our kids have to be literate, our whole city is on fire right now around literacy. And that's how it should be in every city.
Thank you. I love that. I just knew you had a real world scenario to apply. I just knew it. But my next question will be, what is one takeaway you want advocates to carry with them as they work to bring families more fully into this literacy conversation?
If that's to me, I would love to jump in. If it's not, I just want to say stay engaged. Stay engaged. And the work is not fast work. It's slow work. It's hard work, but it's work that comes from the heart. And knowing that we are actually shaping not only the generation of future kids, but also the generation of our cities and our world. I mean, this is important. Literacy is true freedom for kids and for families. And so this has to be a priority for everybody.
Yeah, Trinace took the words right out of my mouth, basically. I was going to say, fighting for early literacy is a long game. And so it's important to be able to lean on the relationships, the trust, shared commitment to keep moving forward. And I'll just add that even when we're tackling serious issues like this, and in the face of some of the things that Shana mentioned at the beginning of the conversation, there's always room for joy and for creativity and culture. And that's really what sustains the work of advocates to see real change in this area.
And to add on to both, just a reminder for us that the best policy reform comes from partnership, right? It comes from knowing what are our assets in our community, and we know that families know what their children need, and they have a lot of wisdom that really can make our system stronger. And so just ensuring that in our role, whether it's as educators, advocates, that we're really building up our parents and caregivers to have that seat at the table, but also a voice.
I love that. I think each of you have already touched on some things that are in our Q&A box. And so let's get a little bit more specific into things that our folks want to know. The first one is, how would you go about getting started if you don't know anything at all? I will make this a two-part question with two people. So how does one get started if they know nothing? And then the second piece is, how do you recruit others to come along with you? Feel free to jump in.
So I'll start. I think it's mostly about knowing your landscape. So doing your research on your city, the schools in your city, in your community, so you know what's what. Get educated yourself, and then for us, we're always in the community. We are at school events, we're at community events, wherever parents are and children are. That's where we are. And so we're having those honest conversations with parents to let them know who we are and what we're about, and inviting them to join our fellowship to be a part of our movement. And parents are just like so unaware that a movement like this even existed, and that there was options like this and resources like this directly for parents. So that's been a way that we've been able to attract a lot of the parents that we work with specifically.
Thank you. Any others? Awesome. Let's move on to the, oh, go ahead.
I was just going to add, I think, if the question is like, where do we start? Start with what's working. Like Trinae said, like, know your landscape, find the pockets where things maybe are working well and build on that, right? Find somebody who maybe I think in your part of your question, Carl, you said, if you really don't know anything about it, well, find the people who do, right? And ask them what worked there. Maybe that's just within your own city and your own community, but also look for other examples, right? We're always happy to have people ask us questions about what's working in Philly. None of this work is just for us. It's for the future, right? And so we want to share that. So I think, if you want to do this, ask the questions, find the places that it's working, and start small to build to what you can imagine for your city.
Awesome. Thank you. This next question was for Olga. One of our attendees wanted to know, is the document developed with LAUSD publicly available?
It is. It should be on our website, but I can also, if you're sending out an email with the webinar recording, I can send it to you all, and that way it can go along as an attachment.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you. Next question is, can we speak a little bit more about culturally relevant ways to, number one, empower parents, but number two, maybe as a parent, how do we communicate with systems at large about creating space?
I would speak to that. So again, what we do is we hold those spaces in our community that are open to the families that we serve. And while all families are welcome, families that are coming are going to be those families that are culturally connected to the work that we're doing, just being honest. And so those are the families that we are most engaging with. And just really, like I said, having our fellowships where we're training them on what is going on, because that's the first thing, is that parents don't really know what's going on. And our motto is that parents do care. And so once we can get them educated and informed and connected with other parents, like, they're going to do the work, and they're going to find those tables where they're pulling a seat up to now, because they know the ways to speak, and they know the data, what the data says about their kids and about our community. So using that as a way to organize parents. Also, in a lot of meetings that we've had, like, I've had trustees come into our meetings and city council members, and they just said it's a different vibe in a meeting than maybe some of the school leadership would have. We're not in there talking jargon. We're in there talking to parents like they're people, so that they understand it. And if we have to break it down even further, than what we're speaking to, we're not above that. We really want them to get an understanding, because when they understand, then they know.
I think that's great.
If I can add like just three things that I always think about, and to kind of establish those spaces is one, really starting with like cultural identity and storytelling, right? Like really being able to create those spaces where families feel like it's not just them as an individual, but that their culture and their identity is welcomed. That's why for us, we use the term community pláticas, right? Instead of like, it's just something that's more relevant to the communities that we're serving here in Los Angeles, right? Another thing that we think about is really centering the relationships before pushing any strategy forward, right? Like understanding what is the values that the folks in the space are bringing and what do they want to get out of this space. And then the third piece, right, which I think works for a lot of the programs that we each have, like the literacy ambassadors, the fellows, and the reading captains, it's like leveraging our like natural connectors. There are certain community members who are natural connectors, right? So how do we continue to use and leverage their abilities and their skills? Because without knowing, I've also witnessed some of our community connectors really start mentoring other family members. And then you start bridging more networks of connectors, right? And so that's what really creates this larger movement that slowly but surely does start to really grow within a community.
And Olga, I would just add to that, another thing is once parents get into the room, like you said, just using that synergy to let them know those connected and shared values that we have are our kids. No matter what your color, creed, or race is, all parents that walk into those doors are caring about their children and wanting the best for their kids. And just using that as that connector to say, one thing that we have in common, despite of everything else, is the love for our kids and the want and the desire for them to be successful. So using that as, despite what cultures may be in the room or the differences may be in the room, that is going to always be the thing that gels us together.
Yes.
I love that. Here's our last question. Could you share more about breaking down barriers for families who are looking to address student progress and maybe early indicators of readers who may be struggling?
Yeah, I think we've spoken to this a little bit, but some of it is giving parents opportunities to understand the jargon, the education words, the things that the teachers are talking about, and creating training. We have a training that supports parents in understanding what it is their child is learning and should be learning. What are the benchmarks that their child should be working towards between kindergarten and third grade? And then giving parents questions to ask the school, right? So there's certainly actions that schools can take to make their report cards or their information sharing more engaging, but we really focus more on the sort of grassroots, give the parents the power here, and giving parents information about what their school should be doing, right? For example, if there should be a screener 3 times a year, a universal screener for literacy. And so telling parents that that's what the school says they're doing, you need to ask about it. Ask, when was my child screened? How did they do on that screening? What more support can they get? And so that's sort of taking that education language and putting it back in the hands of parents is how we help bridge that.
I love those. You gave so many actionable steps. Right now, I'm going to close off our Q&A section and pass it back to Shayna. Thank you all so much for just sharing the wealth of your knowledge, but also your real world experiences and just the practical tools you all have used. I'm sure it was more than helpful to our folks who are going to view this in the moment and later.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Carl said it so well. Olga, Julia, Charnace, I wish we could just keep talking and keep hearing about the wealth of fantastic programming, expertise, and knowledge that you bring to the table. I hope that for everyone on the line, this is just the beginning of the conversation, certainly not the end. But this webinar is coming to a close. And so with that, I wanted to share just a few last sort of resources in terms of where we go from here. So if we're able to get the slides back up, great. If not, we will include this in our follow-up email to you all. But EdTrust has worked on family engagement at a state and district level for several years as part of our social, emotional, academic development work stream. And so we've put out a wealth of resources in terms of how these two things are connected: student social, emotional, and academic development, and family engagement. And so you'll see a screenshot of that report there. We also have recommendations if that's the way that you're thinking of leaning into this, some survey results around engaging families of young children and their shared experiences and really illuminating findings there. And then we most recently put out sort of principles to guide our conversations around literacy instruction, literacy development for all students, and how to center equity. Unsurprisingly, engaging families authentically and in all the ways that panelists have spoken to are kind of a cornerstone of those principles. And so we encourage you to check that out. On the Alliance for Resource Equity side, we also have, like I shared at the top of the call, a wealth of resources that help you kind of dig in to some of the bright spots. Julia mentioned, like, start with what's working. And so we have a diagnostic tool as it relates to family engagement in your community that could help you lean in there, as well as some messaging guidance and other things as well. Some closing thoughts and logistics. We would love to hear how this session went for you. Thank you for bearing with us with some technology considerations and whatnot. And so there's a QR code on the slide to share your feedback. It takes about 4 seconds. And then we would love to have you join for the next 2 webinar sessions in our series. Next week, we'll be talking about adolescent literacy and thinking about the needs of older students struggling with reading. What does the research base suggest? Where are some promising strategies in terms of policy or other advocacy considerations? And also, what are teachers saying about this? Some of the challenges and lived experiences that they bring together. We want to make sure that's central to the conversation. And then for our 3rd session, we'll be talking about making sure that the books and the curriculum materials that students are engaging with are authentic in their representation, and that they're speaking to students' identities and interests, thinking about the proliferation of some ways that advocates could lean in on helping kind of stop the censorship of various, like, depictions of various identities, LGBTQ identities, Black and Brown identities, honest conversations about our nation's history. And then lastly, we have an ARE, Alliance for Resource Equity newsletter that helps promote kind of all of these great resources in terms of the webinar series, but also as we find actionable tools and things like that, we circulate that on a monthly basis. And so encourage you to sign up there. Again, thank you all for joining. Again, I hope this is the conversation and certainly not the end. And again, a huge thank you to our panelists. Have a great afternoon, everyone. All right, I think that's all